Great. So good morning, and thank you for joining us for our micro session on empowering parents and caregivers. So advocating for culturally responsive care in schools. So I just wanted to extend my deepest gratitude for being here with us this morning on such an important topic. So today we will be exploring practical strategies for parents to engage and advocate for their child's culturally responsive care in schools. So this presentation will highlight the importance of fostering an inclusive environment that supports a child's unique identity, whether related to race, gender, culture, or abilities. So in today's session, we will be discussing practical strategies on how parents and caregivers can collaborate with school staff to ensure that their child feels valued, respected, and empowered. And also, we will be discussing how schools can better bolster family and community support. So I am going to introduce myself because this may be the first time that you have met me. So more than ever specific to this topic, it's important to contextualize who I am as a consultant and share why I teach this and why I'm so passionate about this topic. So I am a child of immigrant parents, and my parents didn't have access to the resources to really advocate for me when I was in the school system, which really impacted my mental health and education. So although I love teaching on a macro level, it's really important to also work on an individual level, which is why I work as a therapist with a lot of my clients being parents and caregivers. So we're just going to move on in terms of who I am a little bit more and what Noel Huda is. So it's really founded with the intention of providing culturally responsive care. We offer individual therapy, consultation support, and clinical supervision. I have experience with a variety of industries, and we offer virtual services across Ontario and Canada. And I specialize in supporting families, parents, and caregivers. So we're going to move on actually to our poll. And so I really want folks to reflect before we jump in, just so that I can really gauge where you are all with this topic. So please feel free to share your response in the chat or if you feel comfortable with the poll. But how confident do you feel sharing your concerns about your child's mental health or academics to school staff? Do you feel very confident, somewhat confident, or not at all confident? So I'm going to just give folks just a moment to respond to that. And please let me know in the chat if that's not something that you see, or you can also comment in the chat as well if you feel more comfortable. Thank you, everyone. So we're going to just move on to our next piece. And we're going to talk a little bit more on our next slide about what culturally responsive care means. So culturally responsive care is the intentional and consistent decision school staff make to see, respect, and celebrate the aspects that make each student unique. It's an acknowledgement of an intersectional existence in the world and how this shapes their experiences. So it's really important that we're all on the same page regarding our understanding of this term. And we're going to just move on to our next. So why is it important for us to advocate for our children and our youth? So it's really to boost confidence and self-worth. So when parents and caregivers advocate for their children, it shows them that their voices and needs are valid. So this builds confidence and a sense of self-worth, encouraging children to express their own needs and their concerns as they grow. No one understands a child's unique learning style, strengths, and challenges better than their parents and caregivers. So advocating for them ensures that children receive that individual support that they need, such as additional tutoring, special education services, or language support for English language learners. It ensures equitable opportunities, so parents and caregivers can help ensure that their children have equal access to programs, resources, and support, regardless of their background, their learning style, or their individual needs. Children need an environment where they feel safe and where they feel valued. And advocating for your child can actually model self-advocacy for young people. It teaches them how to navigate the school system, communicate their own needs, and advocate for themselves and others in the future. We're going to move on to our next slide in terms of why it is important, or sorry, how to advocate for your child in schools. So I'm just going to wait for our tech to just catch up to move on to our next slide. So in terms of advocating for your child in schools, it's important to intentionally create a relationship where your child's educator or relevant school staff, such as a school social worker, child and youth worker, or guidance counselor. It's also important to check in with the school about your child's progress. So if there are any, presenting needs, if you notice that your child requires more support, make sure to connect with the right school staff. And lastly, it's really important for you to take initiative as a parent or caregiver by being a part of groups such as a parent council. Oops, sorry, I just noticed the slides are down, so I'm just going to give our tech support just a moment just to jump back in. Give this 1 second. And hopefully the slides are to come back up. Sorry about that, folks. We're going to move into our next slide, which is how schools can bolster family and community engagement. So it's really important for schools especially to be intentional about including parent and caregiver voices. So this would include hosting an event or forum where parents and caregivers can share their experiences. It's also important to offer workshops or webinars specifically for parents and caregivers on topics such as navigating the school system and sharing what supports are available for children and youth. We need to be really intentional about building relationships with parents and caregivers. So this can look like holding something like a family engagement night. And lastly, we need to take into consideration that English may not be everyone's first language and ensure access for them by creating resources that are multilingual or having translators when needed. So we're going to just jump into our next slide, which is just a few resources. So I'd really encourage you to read more on this topic. School Mental Health Ontario has really amazing resources on this topic. So I definitely encourage you to check them out. They are free as well and accessible throughout Canada and are in English and French. So I did want to leave some time for folks to ask some questions just in case anything is coming up for you. But we'll just start wrapping up in terms of our next slide. But thank you everyone for being here and being committed to learn about how to advocate for culturally responsive care in schools. If you'd like to learn more about my upcoming webinars or resources, feel free to follow us in social media or sign up for our newsletter. I do support parents and caregivers as a therapist in terms of navigating school system and supporting their children. And as someone who's worked in partnership with schools, I'm more than happy to support you. So we could leave some time for folks if they have any questions or any comments, any concerns. I'll be here for a few minutes if that's supportive for folks. But thank you for being here with me today in this space.
Hi. Can you hear me if I ask the question?
Please go for it, Allison. I can hear you.
Okay, sorry, I'm just walking my dog, so I'm staying
That's
off camera.
okay.
Thank you. Thank you for your presentation. It's really great to know of the support and things like that. Um, and I'm just wondering when you talk about, and I missed the beginning, so you might have said it. When you talk about like, culturally, like culturally appropriate, culturally sensitive, um,
Mhm.
like how do you do that and like navigate the like complex kind of geopolitical things going on in the world?
That's a really good question. I think it's important, especially in this context that we're talking about in terms of advocating for your child in a school system. I would be really mindful in terms of how that impacts your child. So I'll give you an example, and please let me know if we're on the same page or if I'm like way off. But I work with a lot of newcomer students, and a lot of them have been displaced because of conditions in their country, for example. So what's really important, for example, for when I work with newcomer parents, is letting them know that it's important to share all the complexities and nuances that they experience as a child in their school system. So perhaps they were unable to attend school because they didn't have access to it. So there might be a gap in education, and explaining that to the school that their child is currently in. So that way, the school systems here don't have that same expectation that they're performing at a certain age. Does that make sense, Allison? Am I answering your question or am I way off?
Um, yeah, it does. Yeah, I don't know that my question actually really has an answer or that it's that much of a
No,
appreciate you you giving it a shot. Yeah, thank you.
you're welcome. It's a hard place to be. It's a good question.